The hall of the African Union's annual summit in Addis Ababa was packed to capacity. Flags of more than 50 nations draped from the ceiling, their colors blending into a mosaic of ambition, rivalry, and unspoken history. Cameras from CNN, Al Jazeera, and France 24 swept across the room, broadcasting the spectacle live to millions across the globe. Diplomats whispered in multiple languages, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this gathering would not be ordinary. At the center of the stage, under glaring spotlights, sat two men whose presence alone commanded attention: French President Emmanuel Macron and Burkina Faso's captain-turned-president, Ibrahim Traoré. Macron, in a tailored navy suit, wore the smile of a man who believed he was in control of the narrative. His reputation as Europe's champion of influence in Africa preceded him. To him, this was his arena, an opportunity to remind African nations of France's indispensable role. He leaned back casually, fingers clasped, the faint smirk of condescension etched into his lips. Across from him, Traoré sat upright, expression calm but unwavering. Dressed in his military uniform rather than a politician's suit, he embodied the defiance of a younger generation of African leadership. His silence was not weakness, it was preparation. Observers could sense it. Every lens zoomed in, waiting for the inevitable clash. When the moderator gave Macron the microphone, the French president wasted no time. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with self-assuredness. "Let us remember," Macron began, "France has been a partner to Africa for generations. We built schools, hospitals, institutions. We gave opportunities. Without us, much of what you see today would not exist. It is a truth some may not want to hear, but it is a truth nonetheless." The audience shifted uncomfortably. The weight of colonial memory hung heavy. But Macron pressed on, his smile sharpening into something almost mocking. "Africa owes us everything," he declared, his tone ringing with paternalism. "And perhaps it is time some of your leaders acknowledged that debt." The room froze. Delegates exchanged glances, whispers rising into a low rumble. Cameras caught the smirk on Macron's face, one that would later be replayed endlessly across social media. The insult was clear, and the challenge unmistakable. All eyes turned to Ibrahim Traoré. He did not flinch, did not break eye contact. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the microphone. The silence in the hall was deafening. Ibrahim Traoré adjusted the microphone slowly, his hand steady, his eyes never leaving Macron's. The silence in the hall was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the faint hum of cameras zooming closer. For a moment, the young leader said nothing, letting the weight of the French president's words linger in the air. Then he spoke, his voice calm, deep, and unshakably clear. "Mr. President," Traoré began, his French-accented English resonating through the hall, "you say we owe you everything. But I ask you, what exactly do we owe you? Do we owe you for the land that was taken from our ancestors? Do we owe you for the gold, the uranium, the cocoa, the cotton that left Africa to build Europe's wealth, while our people remained poor? Do we owe you for the chains, for the blood, for the humiliation that your empires left behind?" A murmur rippled across the audience. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, journalists scribbled frantically, and the split-screen broadcast cut between Macron's tight smile and Traoré's steady gaze. "You speak of schools and hospitals," Traoré continued, his tone sharpening, "but even those were designed to serve your interests, not ours. They trained clerks for your offices, laborers for your mines, soldiers for your wars. They did not free us, they chained us to dependency." Macron shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering ever so slightly. The cameras caught it, and social media users around the world would later freeze-frame that exact moment, the instant the French president's mask began to crack. "But let me be very clear," Traoré said, leaning slightly closer to the microphone. His voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction. "Burkina Faso does not owe you. Mali does not owe you. Niger does not owe you. Africa does not owe France, nor Europe, nor anyone else. If there is a debt, it is the opposite. The world owes Africa for centuries of stolen wealth, stolen dignity, stolen futures. Gasps filled the hall. Some delegates clapped softly, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. Traoré's words had cut straight to the wound that many were too afraid to expose. And if you came here expecting us to bow our heads in gratitude, he concluded, his eyes locking on Macron's once again, then you came to the wrong generation. We owe you nothing. The final sentence hit the hall like thunder. Journalists rushed to send breaking alerts, and Twitter began to erupt within seconds, hashtags forming in real time. The camera zoomed in on Macron, whose face, for the first time in the session, showed no smirk, only a clenched jaw. The clash had officially begun. For a few long seconds, Emmanuel Macron remained silent, his jaw tight, his hands clasped just a little too firmly on the armrests of his chair. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, broadcasting his every twitch to millions of viewers around the world. He was a seasoned politician, trained to handle hostile questions, but Traoré's words had struck deeper than he expected. His smirk was gone, replaced with the practiced half-smile of a man trying to regain control. Captain Traoré, Macron began, this time abandoning his smooth, paternal tone for something sharper. Your words may stir applause in this room, but speeches do not build nations. Anger does not feed children. Defiance does not create jobs. He leaned forward, raising his voice just enough to echo across the chamber. France invests billions in Africa. We provide security, education, infrastructure. Without our cooperation, your countries risk collapse. So I ask you again, what will you stand on, once the hand that supports you is withdrawn? The remark drew a mixture of gasps and murmurs. To many, it sounded less like a warning and more like a threat. Macron's eyes locked on Traoré, challenging him openly. You speak of independence, Macron continued, his voice hardening, but independence is not isolation. If you reject partners like France, you will find yourselves with nothing but instability. Do not mistake arrogance for strength. Without France, without Europe, without the West, you cannot succeed. That is the reality. The words carried an unmistakable edge of condescension. Macron thought he had reasserted dominance, reminding everyone of France's power and the risks of resistance. His supporters in the room nodded, though uneasily. The French cameras lingered on him, eager to frame his words as a return to authority. But across the hall, Ibrahim Traoré remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Macron, his expression unreadable. He neither smiled nor frowned. He simply waited, as if giving Macron the rope to tie his own knots. Then, as the murmurs began to swell again, the young Burkinabe leader leaned back toward his microphone. His lips parted, and though his voice was calm, it cut through the hall with surgical precision. You say we cannot succeed without you, Traoré began, his tone almost gentle, but tell me, Mr. President, what kind of success is it, if it depends on kneeling? The hall froze again. Every journalist in the room instantly realized, the clash was far from over, and the next exchange could define the summit, perhaps even the narrative of Africa's future. The chamber was silent, all eyes locked on Ibrahim Traoré. Macron's words still hung in the air like smoke, but Traoré's calm retort had already begun to clear it away. He leaned forward, his hands resting firmly on the podium, his voice steady but sharpened with conviction. You say we risk collapse without you, Traoré began, his tone deliberate. But what you call collapse, we call liberation. What you call instability, we call rebirth. For decades, you have told us the same story, that Africa cannot stand without France, without Europe, without the West. But look at us now, still standing, still rising, despite every effort to keep us on our knees. The word struck with the force of a hammer. Delegates shifted, some nodding, others stunned. The split-screen broadcast captured Macron's stiffened posture beside Traoré's unflinching gaze, the contrast too powerful to ignore. You remind us of your billions in aid, Traore continued, his voice growing stronger. But tell me, Mr. President, what is aid if it returns to you tenfold? What is investment if it drains more wealth than it creates? For every road you build, how many tons of our gold and uranium leave our soil? For every school you fund, how many contracts do you sign that rob us of sovereignty? Do not dress chains in ribbons and call them gifts. The hall erupted in murmurs. Journalists leaned forward, typing frantically. Social media feeds lit up with real-time commentary, #Traoré Macron, #AfricaSpeaks, #WeUnothing. The narrative was shifting before their eyes. Traoré's tone dropped lower now, but it carried even more weight. You say without you, we have no future. But the truth is this, it is without us that you have no future. Without African resources, without African labor, without African markets, what is France? What is Europe? You accuse us of arrogance, but arrogance is believing a continent of 1.4 billion people cannot survive without your approval. Gasps and scattered applause followed. Some delegates rose to their feet, others exchanged anxious glances. Macron's face grew tense, his smirk gone completely. Then Traoré delivered the line that would echo far beyond that room, Mr. President, we are not your children, and we are not your property. We are Africa. And Africa does not owe you, it owes itself. The hall exploded in applause. Cameras flashed, delegates clapped, and the atmosphere transformed from unease to electricity. Macron sat rigid, his authority cracking under the weight of Traoré's defiance. The clash had moved beyond diplomacy. It was now a battle for the soul of Africa, fought not with weapons but with words, and Traoré was winning. The thunderous applause still echoed through the Grand Chamber, but Emmanuel Macron did not join in. His face was pale with restrained anger, his fingers drumming nervously against the polished wood of his desk. For the first time in his political career, he looked less like the confident statesman of Europe and more like a man cornered in his own arena. Cameras broadcast every second of his discomfort across the globe, and social media platforms dissected it in real time. He forced a thin smile, lifting his microphone slowly. President Traoré, Macron said, his voice steady but lacking its earlier confidence, I understand your passion. I respect your determination. But let us not confuse rhetoric with reality. Independence is not a speech, it is a structure. It is built with institutions, economies, alliances. Without those, your words are but dreams. The attempt at composure fooled no one. His tone sounded defensive, his arguments rehearsed. Delegates in the chamber exchanged knowing glances. Some French allies applauded politely, but the applause was hollow, a faint echo compared to the roar Traoré had unleashed minutes earlier. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands in front of him, listening patiently, as though Macron were a student explaining himself to a teacher. The contrast was devastating. Macron continued, trying to reclaim authority. Africa needs partners, not enemies. France has always been a partner. But when you reject cooperation, you open the door to instability, to exploitation by powers that care nothing for your people. Ask yourselves, who benefits when Africa isolates itself from the West? Not your children, not your workers, not your future. His words carried a desperate edge, a plea disguised as advice. But the room had shifted, the energy no longer belonged to him. And then, like a hammer striking the final nail, Traoré leaned into his microphone and spoke softly, but with undeniable force. Mr. Macron, what you call cooperation, we have lived as dependency. What you call partnership, we have experienced as control. And if sovereignty looks like isolation to you, then perhaps you never understood sovereignty at all. The chamber erupted again, applause, chants, some even rising to their feet. The young leader of Burkina Faso had not only defended his nation, he had turned the entire summit into a stage where Africa's voice roared louder than France's warnings. Macron sat back, his expression dark. He had tried to turn the tide, but instead, he was drowning in it. The chamber now belonged to Ibrahim Traoré. His words had not only silenced Macron, they had ignited something larger, something that spread across the room like fire on dry grass. One by one, African delegates began to rise from their seats. Some clapped slowly, deliberately. Others raised their fists in solidarity. The sound of applause no longer came just from the public gallery, it thundered from the heart of Africa's representatives themselves. The camera zoomed in on the faces of presidents, ministers, and diplomats, men and women from across the continent. Many of them had sat silently through decades of French rhetoric, nodding politely while signing deals that served everyone but their people. But tonight, they were standing. Tonight, they were choosing. The delegate from Mali spoke first, his voice cutting through the clamor. President Traoré speaks not only for Burkina Faso, but for us all. For too long, we have bowed our heads in these halls. No longer. Africa's dignity cannot be negotiated. Applause thundered again. The South African minister rose next. France speaks of partnership, but where was partnership when our people paid debts larger than the loans? Where was partnership when our land was mined and our youth were unemployed? President Traoré is right, we owe nothing. The debt belongs to those who profited, not those who suffered. Macron's eyes darted nervously from one delegate to another. He tried to maintain composure, but the weight of isolation pressed against him. His usual allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to risk standing against the rising tide of African solidarity. Then, the Nigerian ambassador stood. Nigeria, long seen as a balancing force between Africa and Europe, had often defended Western cooperation. But tonight, his voice was firm. Our people are watching. They see our leaders fly to summits, return with empty promises, while the West grows richer. President Traoré is young, but his courage speaks louder than age. We support him. The hall erupted, louder than ever before. Hashtags flashed across social media screens, hashtag Africa United, hashtag Traoré speaks for yous, hashtag End Colonial Debt. Clips of the standing ovations were already trending worldwide. Commentators on live broadcasts whispered about a generational shift, about a movement too powerful to contain. Meanwhile, Macron sat alone, the once dominant figure now diminished. His allies offered him no rescue. His arguments sounded old, tired, while Traoré's words rang fresh and unyielding. The clash was no longer between two men. It had become a symbol of something larger, the breaking of chains in front of the world. Outside the conference hall, the world was already buzzing. News outlets from London to Washington, from Johannesburg to Cairo, cut into their regular programming to broadcast the exchange between Emmanuel Macron and Ibrahim Traoré. What had started as a routine diplomatic summit had transformed into a historic confrontation. CNN's anchor leaned forward in disbelief. This isn't just another speech, it's a direct rejection of decades of French influence. Traoré's words are electrifying Africa, and you can hear it in the response from the delegates. On Al Jazeera, the coverage was even more pointed. Analysts compared the moment to the Bandung Conference of 1955, when newly independent nations first asserted themselves against colonial powers. We are witnessing the dawn of a new Africa, said one commentator. Traoré has captured the spirit of independence that leaders like Sankara and Nkrumah once embodied. Social media exploded. Millions of clips circulated within hours, each with subtitles in French, English, Arabic, and Swahili. The hashtags #Traoré speaks for Africa and #Macron shaken trended globally. Memes showed Macron shrinking in his chair while Traoré towered above him, calm and unyielding. TikTok creators synced Traoré's defiant words to music, turning them into rallying cries for a generation. But the real impact was on the streets. In Ouagadougou, young people poured into public squares waving Burkinabe flags, chanting Traoré's name. In Dakar, students painted murals of Traoré alongside anti-colonial icons. Even in Paris, African diaspora communities organized spontaneous marches, demanding the end of exploitative policies. International reactions varied. The French press tried to downplay the event, with headlines describing it as youthful arrogance. But even within France, not everyone agreed. Some French citizens flooded forums, admitting that Macron had looked out of touch and condescending. Meanwhile, African intellectuals and political commentators praised Traore as a leader who had finally voiced what millions had long felt but rarely heard on such a global stage. In Washington, a State Department spokesperson avoided direct comment but stressed the importance of constructive dialogue. Yet the unease was clear: a new leader had emerged, one who refused to play by old rules. Inside the hall, Macron remained isolated. Outside, Traore was being crowned, not by ceremony, but by the people. His words had transcended politics and become a symbol. Behind the closed doors of the summit's private chambers, Emmanuel Macron's composure cracked. Away from the cameras, the French president paced furiously, his face flushed. Advisors whispered anxiously, unsure whether to console him or simply stay silent. The humiliation he had endured in front of the entire continent, broadcast live across the world, was unlike anything he had experienced in his political career. "This boy," Macron hissed, slamming his hand against the table, "this soldier-turned-president dares to speak to me like that? To France?" His voice trembled not only with anger but with fear. He knew the implications. Traoré's defiance was not just personal. It symbolized the collapse of France's carefully maintained influence in Africa. One of his senior diplomats tried to soothe him. "Monsieur le Président, perhaps it is a passing wave of rhetoric. The continent has always returned to France in the end." But Macron shook his head sharply. He knew better. The standing ovations, the trending hashtags, the diaspora protests in Paris, these were not fleeting. They were signs of a generational revolt. A revolt against everything France had relied on for decades: control of resources, dominance in trade, the CFA franc, and political loyalty from African elites. Meanwhile, French media scrambled to spin the story. Government-aligned outlets framed Traoré as reckless and irresponsible. Yet even in Paris cafés, murmurs grew louder: perhaps Africa is finally breaking free. The old narrative of France as Africa's guardian no longer held the same power. In African capitals, French ambassadors sent frantic cables back to Paris. Anti-French sentiment has surged overnight. Leaders are hesitant to meet with us. Our leverage is weakening. Each report carried the same underlying message: the balance of power was shifting. For Macron, the fear went beyond losing face. It was about losing control. If Burkina Faso and its allies pushed harder, ending French mining contracts, dismantling military bases, rejecting the CFA franc, others would follow. Niger, Mali, Chad, Senegal, the dominoes were lined up, and Traoré had just given them a push. One advisor leaned in, his voice low. "Monsieur le Président, if this continues, France will no longer be the power it once was in Africa. He has made you look old. Out of touch. Weak." Macron's jaw tightened. He had come to the summit to assert authority. Instead, he had left with the image of a man cornered, diminished. And in his silence, the unspoken truth settled in the room: history was moving, and France was being left behind. Across Africa, the impact of Traoré's defiance against Macron was immediate and electric. In Burkina Faso, thousands flooded the streets of Ouagadougou, waving national flags and chanting his name. Market vendors left their stalls, students poured out of classrooms, and workers abandoned their shifts, all to gather in public squares where giant screens replayed the confrontation. Each time Traoré's words rang out, "We owe you nothing," the crowds erupted with thunderous applause. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, his speech spread like wildfire. Communities that had long felt silenced by external powers found their own frustrations perfectly articulated. Murals appeared overnight on city walls, painting Traore alongside Thomas Sankara and Nelson Mandela, portraying him as part of a continuum of revolutionary African leadership. Even outside the continent, African diaspora communities felt a surge of pride. In Paris, Marseille, Brussels, and New York, young Africans organized rallies, holding up banners that read, "Africa rises, France falls." On social media, viral clips layered Traoré's words with powerful beats, transforming his speech into a rallying anthem. TikTok dances, rap freestyles, and even street art videos spread his defiance to millions who had never before followed African politics. But the support wasn't only symbolic. Economists across Africa began openly discussing alternatives to French-dominated economic structures. Politicians in neighboring states referenced Traoré's courage as justification to renegotiate contracts with European companies. Religious leaders quoted his words in sermons, framing them as not just political but moral truth. International observers were stunned. Analysts compared the phenomenon to the Arab Spring, but with a distinctly African spirit, one rooted not in chaos, but in dignity and sovereignty. "This is not a moment," said a Ghanaian professor on BBC Africa. "This is the start of a movement." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso itself, Traoré became more than a president, he became a symbol of resistance. His face appeared on T-shirts, posters, and banners. His words were printed in newspapers, repeated in classrooms, whispered in villages. Elders told children that they were witnessing history, that their continent was finally learning to speak with one voice. And for France, this was the nightmare, not just the humiliation of Macron, but the rise of a new African confidence that could not be silenced. As the summit drew to its final session, the tension in the air was unmistakable. Macron sat rigidly, his earlier fire dimmed, while delegates from across Africa leaned forward, waiting for Ibrahim Traoré to take the microphone once more. He rose calmly, his presence commanding without effort. The hall, heavy with anticipation, fell into absolute silence. "My brothers and sisters," Traoré began, his voice steady but infused with conviction, "today we were told that Africa owes gratitude to those who once enslaved, exploited, and divided us. But I say this clearly, Africa owes nothing to those who thrived at our expense. We owe nothing, except to our people, to our children, and to the future we are building." He paused, letting the words hang like a weight in the room. Macron shifted uncomfortably, but Traoré continued. "France claims we cannot stand without them. Yet look around, from Dakar to Bamako, from Ouagadougou to Kinshasa, our people are rising. Rising not with fear, but with dignity. Rising not to beg, but to claim what has always been ours." The delegates erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. Cameras zoomed in on the younger leaders in the crowd, nodding vigorously, their faces lit with hope. Traoré raised a hand for silence. "Let this be known, Africa's independence is not a favor granted by Europe. It is not temporary. It is permanent, non-negotiable, and irreversible. Empires fall, but nations endure. And Africa is a continent of nations, proud, sovereign, and unstoppable." His tone softened, but the conviction remained. "To the people of Africa, I say this: do not wait for permission to claim your future. Build your schools, your industries, your armies, your culture with your own hands. Do not let outsiders dictate the rhythm of your destiny. We will walk together, side by side, until Africa is no longer spoken of as a place of need, but as a force of strength." When he concluded, the hall thundered with applause that refused to die down. Delegates embraced, journalists typed feverishly, and ordinary citizens watching across the continent felt something shift inside them. Macron sat isolated, a fading figure in a room that no longer revolved around him. In that moment, history was written. Africa had spoken, and its voice was Ibrahim Traoré.